welcome to Introduction to Master Storytelling, a workshop that's been organised by Hub Cymru Africa for the Wales Africa community, and it will be led by Kieran O'Brien of Ministory. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing introductions, but I will do some introductions. First of all, just to say, please, if you could pop your organisation and your name into the little screen there, where your name is visible, so we get a sense of who is on the call. We are recording this session, so if you actually want to be anonymous, don't want to appear on the video, then do the reverse of what I've just said and don't put your name into the box. Give yourself some sort of anonymous title, keep your camera off, and you won't appear in the video, and nobody need ever know that you were here, if that is an issue. I think we're doing this on Zoom. It would be great if people could keep their cameras on. That would be ideal, just so we get a sense of, are people still awake? Are they listening? Are they engaging? We can't make you keep your camera on, of course, but it would be lovely if you could, because there's nothing more dull than trying to give a presentation to a bunch of black screens, I have found. So that would be lovely if you could do that. If you have any questions, then please do put them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand using the little icons at the bottom of the screen. You should be able to raise your hand and we will come to you, but probably easier, given the flow of the workshop, if people put any questions that they have in the chat box, and we will make sure that we come to those and deal with them as well. We really would like everybody to participate. It's absolutely fine if you've got other things to do for the first bit of this workshop. Then you listen away. There will come a point where we will be splitting people into groups, and we would like people to talk to each other. So at that point, if you really have just gone off to do the washing up or do some shopping and left your screen on, then it will be quite difficult. So please do stay there. And if you no longer wish to participate in the workshop, then please, you are quite free to leave. For behaviour, this is we'd like it to be a challenging but open environment. We will not tolerate abuse of any sort. We do want to hear from everybody. We want to hear your honest thoughts, opinions, and experiences, but it is important to note that nobody's life experiences can be questioned. Let me have a look. Somebody in the waiting room coming in now. If there is a safeguarding issue, if there is a problem with somebody's behaviour, then please do flag it with myself or with Emma Beecham, who you can see there is also my colleague from Hub Cymru Africa. If there is a serious issue that you want to follow up further, then please do go to the Welsh Centre for International Affairs website, and you can find there safeguarding reporting and whistleblowing if you have got something serious that you want to report. I need to do some polling, so let me do that to start with. We would like to do a little bit of polling at the beginning, at the end, for our evaluation of the event, just to see what people have learnt and how everything has gone. So I will launch the start poll. Okay, so that's a little bit of opening polling done, so that's very helpful. Let me return to this, and right, so we've done polling. I'd just like to talk a little bit before we come to Kieran, because Kieran's going to talk about storytelling, and he's going to be looking at all sorts of things around storytelling, but I think it's important to put it into context, and to put it into the context of the work that Hub Cymru Africa has been doing, looking at storytelling, looking at narratives, looking at the ways that particularly we in what we used to call the international development sector talk about, portray, think about people in Africa. And storytelling can be an incredible force for good. It can challenge stereotypes, it can challenge racism, but storytelling, of course, can also reinforce racism, can reinforce stereotypes, and can be as problematic as it is helpful. So some work that we've been doing in Hub Cymru Africa is the Anti-Racism Charter. We've been working with groups around Wales, supported by groups in Africa, to address the racism in the sector. And we encourage everybody here to get involved in that, to sign up to the Anti-Racism Charter, and to look all over the work that their organisation is doing, how they evaluate need, how they plan work, how they assess the work that they're doing, how they communicate, and all sorts of other things. And if you check out the Anti-Racism Charter, then you'll see there's some tools there as well, looking at communications and storytelling. And that work draws quite heavily on the work of an organisation called Africa No Filter, which has produced an amazing guide to how to tell an African story. And we would definitely recommend that you have a look at that guide. And also that you have a look at, there's a video on the Hub Cymru Africa YouTube channel, which is a talk by Moki Makura from Africa No Filter on how to tell an African story. And we would definitely recommend that anybody who's interested in storytelling, interested in Africa, and interested in communicating about these issues, have a look at that and check out some of those resources. So that is, I think, enough from me. What we are mainly here to do is to hear from Kieran. And Kieran O'Brien is a professional communicator, very experienced operative in the area, and has been doing some amazing work supporting groups and organisations to tell their stories. So what I'd like to do is hand over to Kieran, and you can kick off, please, Kieran.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me along. Very excited to be sharing some of this work around master storytelling. So the first question is obviously an important one. What is master storytelling? And I just want to highlight it's not the ability to master storytelling as if that's a possibility. Master storytelling is a different way of working with narratives and meta-narratives in order to drive positive change with your audiences. So we talk about storytelling being really important about engaging and motivating audiences into positive change and positive action. But my argument, after working over 15 years in the charity sector, working on numerous campaigns, working with a range of clients on storytelling initiatives, I've seen a very worrying trend, and a trend I think we need to reverse quickly. And that's a shift more and more towards marketing methodologies. I call this the marketing paradigm. And this marketing paradigm works. It's good for getting people to sign up to your campaign. It's good for short-term engagement. It's good to engage people with a product. But marketing is designed for profit, not for behavioral change. And what the result is in the long term is that we create campaigns, activities, engagements with our audiences, but we struggle with long-term behavioral change. We struggle with cultural change, societal change. We struggle to get the necessary political will that we need to see on the changes that we want to bring about. So these are huge issues that we should be very concerned about. And just because marketing works doesn't mean that it works in a way that we want it to work. And my vision is that we need to move away from marketing methodology and the marketing paradigm altogether and embrace a new paradigm, which I call the storytelling paradigm. Now, this storytelling paradigm sits in this presentation. Unfortunately, it's going to be very abstract. It's going to be it's going to be lots of charts and graphs to try to explain what the storytelling paradigm is. So I apologize in advance if you're expecting to be sat down and we talk about stories and how to write a story or how to narrate. We're not going to be covering that in this session. Instead, we're going to be looking at some deeper issues around motivation. And why do we keep telling the same story again and again, expecting different results? And A classic example in that is the climate movement, especially around climate change, where we see that there's been enormous success in creating a global movement for positive change. Millions of people shouting out, trying to bring about change on such an important issue. And yet, what we seem to be missing is the motivation for change. We know what to do, but we're not motivated to do it. So this is a real issue. So how do we work with motivation? Is ultimately what master storytelling is all about. And as a result, it affects every aspect of our work. This is not just for communicators or someone who are on the social media aspect of the organization. This affects anyone working in leadership. If you're looking to recruit volunteers, if you're working face-to-face with audiences in any way, or if you're working in policy, for example, and you want to bring about meaningful change, what is the meta-narrative that you are using to engage audiences? What is the meta-narrative that you're using to drive positive change? Because if there's a problem at the meta-narrative level, then no matter how shiny your campaign is, how colorful, bright, exciting, how warm, and also how emotionally engaging it is, if the meta-narrative, if there's a fault at the meta-narrative level, you won't see the long-term change. So it's a really important topic that I think we all need to be discussing, looking at what is meta-narrative and how to work with it. But before I do, just to explain who Ministory is, we are a storytelling agency and we work on a range of projects. So a lot of our work's around animations, video storytelling and mixed media. But we also do storytelling training, and on our website we have a wide range of training programs for you to engage with. We also do storytelling projects where we do big projects around using storytelling methodologies that can fit onto your website and a whole range of outputs. And we also do storytelling consultancy. So we're trying to help you to think more like a storyteller in order to bring about positive change. So the outline for the next hour is that so we'll be looking at what is storytelling. We'll be looking at the collective problems we face in working for positive change. We'll also be touching upon this idea of what is master storytelling and how do we get it to work for our audiences. But to understand that, we need to understand what meta-narratives are. And also we need to understand motivation and how motivation links to storytelling. When we move from extrinsic motivation, which is marketing, to intrinsic motivation, we need to look more at storytelling methodologies and approaches. And this is where things get a little bit deep. We also need to look at paradigms. What is a paradigm? And how do we shift from a marketing paradigm to a storytelling paradigm? And what would the consequences of that shift be in our work? And also, how do we create new meta-narratives to drive positive change? How do we overcome some of the perennial problems that we all face? And I think, as I mentioned, one of the biggest problems I find working on a range of campaigns over the years is that we are stuck in a loop. We seem to be telling the same story and again, expecting different change to happen. So we change the novelty. So we might change the name of the campaign, the colors and how it looks. We might try to change the visual aspects of the campaigns we do. Maybe we might change some of the wording. We might change, say, rather than taking action on climate change, we'll say, let's reframe that and take action on global warming or accelerated warming. But we don't change the meta-narrative. We change the narrative, but the meta-narrative remains the same. That meta-narrative is based on a very simple model, which is an information deficit model. It's a belief that if people know about something, they will do it. So we treat people more and more like computers. If we give them the right information, or if we give them information in an emotive way, or we do the colors and we change the feel and look of our campaigns. But the meta-narrative is still based on the information deficit model that if people know about something, they will do the action. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. People do know about these issues, and if you ask them, Do they care about climate change? Yes, they do. Do they care about global poverty or disability rights? Yes, they do. But when you ask them to show up, pay up, or attend or get involved in your campaign, it feels like pulling teeth. It's hard work trying to get people together. So the motivation aspect is really important. So what is happening at the meta-narrative level? What are we getting wrong and how can we fix it? And that's really important. So this doesn't just affect, I often refer to the climate movements throughout this talk because my recent training program is around the climate change issue, because it serves as a great model of where we have done everything right, we've ticked every box, and yet the motivation still hasn't emerged. The political will still hasn't emerged. The necessary political will for change still isn't there on some of the biggest issues that we all care about. And what's strange is if you ask people if they care, they say yes. So we have these underlying issues that are under the surface. One is the growing polarization on something that we should all care about, why people switching off, turning off, and disengaging with it altogether. Is that something to do with us, or is that something to do? So I just check. Oh, sorry, it's not updating, is it? Sorry, the slides, I'm seeing different slides to you. This is a technical issue. Sorry, there we go. You can see that now. So you can see perennial problems, yeah? Good.
Yes.
Okay, so growing polarization, that people are switching off and turning off to the messages that most people will claim that they support. We also have that frustrating thin yes, where people will say yes, they believe in your campaign, they believe in your cause, but they don't turn up, show up, or get involved in any meaningful way. So it's kind of low motivation we're dealing with. We also struggle with low audience engagements, trying to engage audiences on positive change. We also have this growing concern around intergenerational challenges, where younger audiences who claim to be very positive around issues of international issues, environmental issues, and having worked with many charities over the years, they really struggle trying to get younger audiences engaged, which seems a paradox. And then it feels almost impossible to get people out physically to an event. If you're running a training event, a meeting, it's almost impossible to get people out of their houses to one shared area. And this is not a concern with just one or two. When I speak to many charities, they all face these perennial issues, these perennial problems. So these are all linked to motivation. How do we overcome low motivation and engagement? So the results of this is of low motivation all comes from a bad meta-narrative. The areas we struggle with are around engaging cold and in different audiences with our cause. Those who have switched off, we find really hard to engage with. We find it very challenging to create long-term behavioral change. We can get people to sign up to our campaign to engage with our social media strategy, but to bring about long-term behavior change is really challenging. It's almost impossible sometimes, it feels, to bring about cultural change. So every time we try to bring about positive aspects of our cause, we almost hit this brick wall, which is the culture doesn't really absorb the values which we're trying to promote. As a result, we find it very difficult to create social change and also the necessary political will for our respective causes. So these are not only perennial problems, they are shared problems across the wider sector around motivation. How do we motivate and engage audiences into positive change? So the answer is always down to the story that we're telling. So first of all, we're going to explore this idea of what is a story, because sometimes we think of a story as someone standing up front, in front of an audience, reading out a story and using a story to inspire and emotively engage the audience to think about the subject. And that certainly is storytelling. but it's a very restricted aspect of storytelling. It's a very confrontational way of storytelling. It's me, I have a story to tell you. It's a face-to-face engagement. But most storytelling, when we look at ancient cultures and indigenous cultures today, they don't tell stories face-to-face. This is interesting. They tell stories around a circle, shoulder to shoulder. So primary engagement around storytelling is a shoulder-to-shoulder engagement, not a face-to-face engagement. Whether it's sat around a fire or sat around weaving a quilt or making things, there's a shoulder-to-shoulder engagement in storytelling. And this is important when we get into the psychology of storytelling, because our psychology of storytelling, as from the Western kind of technocratic worldview that we hold, is very much, how do I tell my story to you? And it becomes I have this aspect which I want you to know about. And we're back to the information deficit model. I have something to give to you. And once you have that, you will then return the action, the output, whatever it is. So it's very much a face-to-face engagement. But when we explore this type of storytelling, we can see that sits very much into the marketing paradigm. This is how marketing works. Marketing is very much a face-to-face engagement. It's very much I have something to sell you. And if I can convince you, if I can give you enough information, if I can even manipulate you to think in a certain way, I can sell my product to you. So we have this shift from storytelling in a Western perspective is moving more and more towards marketing. So much that passes for storytelling in our communications is not storytelling, it's actually marketing. It derives from marketing philosophy and marketing kind of theory that if we give a certain amount of information, we can get the audiences to respond, to sign up, to engage with our resources or some sort of output. So that's pretty much the storytelling that we are used to, and it's also storytelling that sits at the heart of our communications. Also, this type of storytelling becomes very much, it's quite hard to explain, very much as the outsider looking in. Now, think when you read a story, to think when you open up a book, that you are transported into a different world. You almost leave the world that you're in, and you can almost feel and engage this different world. It's a very emotively transcendent moment that when we read good stories. And if you get caught up in a really, really good story, it takes a while to readjust to come back to the world. I don't know if you've ever come out of the cinema after watching a really good movie. There's a moment of readjustment back to reality. A few seconds ago, you were zooming around the universe in a spaceship, battling some sort of villains, and now you're back to normality. And if the movie was really good, that readjustment takes quite a few seconds, even moments. So storytelling transports you into another way of being. You are transported into the imagination of the storyteller. But when I looked at communications across most of the charities, we have different parts of the website to say we're telling our story. They don't do any of that. In fact, it's more like reporting. This is X. X lives in this village. This village is being something. As a result of that, and it's telling it as a reporter would tell the news. It's a very abstract, external, outward looking in on the situation. It doesn't take your audience into that and be part of that in order for you to be transformed. In other words, it has an intention to tell you about this story so that you can do something as a result. So we're back to the same meta-narrative, the information deficit model, that if you hear about a village that is suffering from water shortages in South Sudan, therefore you'll sign up to our campaign or your fundraise with us. So if you have this information deficit, you will then know about this and you'll respond in kind. And If we do it emotively, we make you really feel for this situation, and then you're more likely to respond in kind. Now, this feels good. This feels the right way to approach it. But my argument is that leads to short-term motivation, not long-term behavioral change. It leads to a devitalization of our storytelling. It leads to a flattening of what our story potential could be. It also objectifies the people that we are telling stories about. It treats them as objects that we need to feel sorry or it's sympathy for. It doesn't bring you into the situation where you feel an empathy and feel part of this bigger story that we're telling. So a lot of our storytelling is shaped by marketing thinking, marketing methodology, and still based on the information deficit model. So meta-narratives. Meta-narrative is a grand or master narrative running throughout the text that gives the story its ultimate meaning or purpose. Now, meta-narrative is really tricky. And before this workshop, we might not have discussed meta-narrative. And when I talk about meta-narrative with a range of people, they don't know what it is. So we don't know what meta-narrative is. And unless you're studying for an English kind of degree, you probably talk about meta-narratives a lot on an academic level. But on a day-to-day level, we wouldn't really talk about meta-narratives. If we're running a campaign, who would talk about what is a meta-narrative here? It's not a question that would arise. And yet, meta-narrative is what transforms people's behaviors. It's the very thing that creates, that engages the values that you want to bring about. So it's one of the missing aspects of storytelling that we overlook at a great cost to the beneficial aspect of what we're trying to do. If we get meta-narrative wrong, doesn't matter how hard you push your campaign, how much money, energy, resources you put into it, if the meta-narrative is wrong, you'll really struggle to engage and motivate audiences to positive change. It's as simple as that. Get the meta-narrative right, then things will happen. Change will happen. It almost grows out and people are inspired and they inspire others. There's an outward movement when we get meta-narrative right. So how do we do that? So first of all, we need to think about when we tell a story, we need to get out of our heads this, I don't know where it comes from, this kind of Western aspects of thinking that we are more like computers. I was reminded in a talk recently that actually we're more like horses than computers. So if we're trying to engage our horses, if we're trying to engage our audiences with information, just think about that. That's only one aspect of what we need to drive motivation. So when we tell a story, something really interesting is happening. When we tell a really good story, it's not that the storyteller gives you all the information. The storyteller tells you enough information, and this is the storyteller's narrative. So that comes from the storyteller. But in the space between the story, we have to make sense of the story. We have to use our imagination, especially when you're reading a book. We have to imagine how these characters look. So storytelling is an encounter, not an information deposit. Storytelling is very different from its technical information. An information manual, you get to it's how to fix your computer if it's broken, go to paragraph form, page 12, very much process orientated. So if you give information, you know how to fix your computer. But again, we're not computers. We are emotive, relational beings. So when we hear a story, we also tell the narrative. So storytelling's encounter, narrative comes from the storyteller, but the meta-narrative comes from us because it's implicit. So when we hear a story, we fill in the gaps and we pull together the implicit narrative, and that comes from within us. So this will make a bit more sense in a few moments when we go on to the next slides. Think of this as flow. So the storyteller is external, from outside moving in. So it's extrinsic flow. out to in. And implicit narrative or meta-narrative is what comes from within and moves out. So that'll make sense in a few minutes. So you've got two types of tensions being held in storytelling, the external and the internal. So the true nature of storytelling is that there are two aspects. Every time we tell a story, every time we engage our audiences, there's two levels of communication there. One is explicit, the narrative, the characters in the story. Let's say if we're running a campaign, who the campaign is for, how many people should be involved, is all the external stuff. All very good, very important. But then we have to think about the implicit nature of storytelling. That meta-narrative sits under the level of consciousness. It's something that comes from within, and we bring that to the table as the listener through our feelings, our understanding of the story. So when we hear a really good story, so we know this from research, and if you look at the science of storytelling, there's lots of research that evidences this, is that our minds come alive with a range of chemicals, so oxytocin, I can't remember, oxytocin and a few others, it sparks into life, that we feel part of that story, we engage, we move into that space of the story. So storytelling is a really powerful way to not only give information to your audiences, it's a really powerful way of creating this space. It's really important here. It's not about putting more information in, it's about creating this space for people to wonder, to be curious, to use their imagination, to see through themselves, and for them to be part of that storytelling experience. So there's that kind of left and right aspect to storytelling. That's really important. And recent research into neurology shows that this perfectly maps with the brain. That's so the two hemispheres of the brain. That this idea, one does creative, one does analytical, is all being debunked. Both hemispheres do both of them. But both hemispheres look at the world in different ways. They do the same things differently. And one deals with explicit information, technical, and the other with implicit, emotive, understanding, the big picture. And what we're doing now is we're pretty much moving all of our communications further and further to the left hemisphere only, and negating the right hemisphere altogether. And the right hemisphere, and we haven't got time to expand on this, does the big picture, makes the big decisions, and sees the whole. And it presents that information to the left. The left analyzes it and breaks it down into small pieces. So when we neglect a whole aspect of the human self in our communications, it doesn't matter how well we articulate our messages, how colorful they are, if we tick all the boxes, the right information, to get the right graphs, the right information, if we work on how we frame the message, if we are missing a whole aspect of the human self, the right hemisphere, then no wonder we end up with low motivation. No wonder we end up with people understand, they care about the issue, but they don't turn up, sign up, they don't get involved. Or you can give a really good campaign, and people will give money to it, but it feels like you need to go back again and run the same campaign again and again. So there's a lot of high energy and low results. And you can see this, and this might be my experience, I don't know if it's your experience, but over the years, you can see this high energy go up, everyone gets involved, and it drops down. High energy, and then drops down. And it's like this jagged tooth saw of up and down. And that is the challenges we all face. And also, when we deal only with the explicit and we ignore the implicit, the meta-narrative, there's a whole host of problems start emerging, and we can't get our heads around it, including polarization. Why are people switching off and turning off to our messages? Because we're saying these things, right? So why are they disagreeing with us? And also around issues around different age groups, younger audiences turning off and switching off. There's a whole range of issues related to us getting it wrong at the meta-narrative level. So I want to give you an example of meta-narrative, because so far this has been quite abstract, and hopefully you will know this story. One should be quite familiar to you. And this is, of course, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So we have this very simple, childish story, if you like, of Goldilocks wandering into the Three Bears' house. While they go off for a walk, and she comes in, tastes the porridge, sits in a chair, breaks one of the chairs, and sleeps in the bed as well. Bears come home and, of course, are quite upset about it. So it's a very simple story, a story that we give to children. But what's really interesting is when we start digging under the surface here, we see this is actually a really powerful story. It's actually enforcing a cultural norm. And what is that cultural norm? So when we tell the story to even 4-year-olds, and they go through the story bit by bit, and then we ask them at the end, what's the story really about? What's amazing, even at a really early age, they are able to articulate the meta-narrative. They are able to articulate what is not there. What's the story really about? The story is really about, it's not really about Goldilocks and Three Bears. It's actually, how did baby bear feel when he came home and saw his chair broken? How did the rest of the bears feel when they saw someone came into their sacred space, their home, and just took advantage of all their belongings? How do they feel about that? And the children, by the end of that story, will know that actually Goldilocks, who represents us, who is human, and the bears, who represents these animals, the other, is that it was not that Goldilocks was bad, it's that Goldilocks did something that was really wrong. And through that experience of that story, we embed a certain value. And that value is around we need to respect other people's private property. And this meta-narrative is so powerful that it seeps into our culture, that we would never think about going into someone's house and just going and using their items or sleeping in their bed. That's culturally unacceptable. But just think about, where does that come from? Does it come from legislation? Of course, there's legislation to back that up. If you go into someone's house, obviously, they can call the police, and that can be enforced externally. But also it comes from our values. We would not even think about going into someone else's home and taking advantage of their personal possessions. So in many ways, these simple stories, even though they can be quite innocent, simple, childish even, they can have a powerful effect on how societies are run and how and change the very values that we care about. So when we look at storytelling, we should be careful not to think that stories and storytelling, even childish stories, are just what they are. From an explicit point of view, you could say Goldilocks and Three Bears, it's an entertaining story, it's good for children, it helps with their literary skills, so they should learn it. But actually, if you look under the surface, a lot of these old stories and simple stories have very powerful meta-narratives that can have real life implications for how our societies are run. So never overlook even the simplistic elements of stories and storytelling in terms of driving positive change in our world today. So am I arguing that we should be telling Goldilocks and the Three Bears type of stories in our work with engaging audiences for positive change? I don't think I really am, but I am pointing to the fact that meta-narratives are really important. Meta-narratives can change how we relate to the world around us. They can change how we perceive reality and also how we feel about the world we want to live in. So we should be quite open to the idea of storytelling as a very powerful way of bringing about positive change. So this is taken from some analysis from an external agency who were looking at what happens when you do marketing strategy versus storytelling strategy. And they looked at comes from the private sector, so it's not charities, but it's very interesting. It shows that if you do marketing strategy based on extrinsic motivational triggers that we should do, so it's very much what I talked about, that zigzag line. It's up and down. You have to keep running campaigns. You have to keep pushing agendas more and more. And it feels like you're going somewhere until you don't go somewhere. And over time, you can see this high energy, high intensity work that we're all doing. And sometimes it feels like we're going nowhere. And that's because the meta-narrative doesn't take us anywhere. When we use storytelling strategy based on intrinsic motivational triggers, please note that the short-term effects might not seem as effective, but over time it builds and builds and builds. So because storytelling, if you get it right, you build on it. Once you tell a story, you can build on that story. And it's like a step change over time. So this is one of the reasons why we should be looking at storytelling strategy when we're engaging our audiences, and not just around using more and more marketing methodologies. So the next aspect I want to talk to you about is motivation. So there's a difference between, and I have to apologize, this is the technical part of the presentation. So do bear with me, that there are two types of motivation, extrinsic and intrinsic. So extrinsic is very much about reward and punishment. It's all about external influences, that I will only do something if I get something in return. So let's look at stage one, which is external regulation. So extrinsic motivation, it's if you want me to sign up to your campaign, you give me something back. Sign up to campaign and I get a free resource pack. I am motivated to do it. Not because I care about the campaign or the cause, because I want that free resource pack. So you can say, actually, extrinsic motivation works. Well, it does work, but it works in a different way to intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation, if we go all the way up to stage 8 on the right-hand side, intrinsic motivation comes from within. It's not, I don't get anything out of this, I do this because I absolutely believe in it. I've connected to the purpose of what you're about, and I radiate that purpose, and I want others to be part of it. So there's kind of an outward movement that people shine when they get to stage 8 motivation. So it's very interesting. So where do we want to be on this motivation continuum? So I'll just very briefly, just go through the different stages so you get a sense of what they are, because they are important. Is that stage 1, reward and punishment. I only do something. So that's the reason why you pay your taxes, because you'll get punished if you don't. It might not come from any real internal motivation. So you've got a big arrow on the bottom, which is it's all external, very little self-regulation. Then move to stage 2. You do something to avoid shame or guilt. It's the same as stage 1, but there's no external aspect of it. So you'll do something if you feel guilty. This is where marketing is really good. It's good at creating anxiety and guilt and fear in order to drive positive change. So when we look at marketing messages, they sit comfortably in stages 1 and 2. That's the dominant stages. Then we move to stage 3. We do something because we recognize it's important. We might not really believe in it. Like, we might not really 100% want to make all the necessary changes to live a simpler lifestyle, but we know it's important. So we'll do some recycling. We'll do a little bit of, a few lifestyle changes, but it doesn't really come from the heart. It's there. It's important. It's more comes from the head, kind of logical rather than from the heart. And then we move to stage 4. This is where we move into working with values and goals. Is that I do something because it's in line with my values. I might not enjoy it, might not really believe in it. It doesn't sit with the stomach kind of level of my being, but it's in line with what my beliefs are. So I'll do that. I believe that we need to work towards a world where since we care for future generations. So I'll make those changes, but it doesn't sit at the stomach. It's there. And then we have a threshold. And when it comes to storytelling, threshold is really important. How do we get people over the threshold from the old to the new? And this is what all archetypal storytelling does. And what's interesting, and this is very fascinating, is that once you cross the threshold, everything changes. So you can't use the same logic on that side of the motivation continuum and apply it to the other, because something else has happened, because you're now more self-regulated in your motivation. So stage 5, you do something because you love it, but there's still some sort of external support for that. So if you're a volunteer, you love volunteering, but you also love volunteering because it's a great office, there's nice people there, and their biscuits they serve are fantastic. Take away those elements, you might not love the volunteering role that you do. So, it still comes from the heart, but there are other aspects to influence you. And then we get into introjected self-regulation. You're self-motivated, but there's still an aspect of the ego. So you might love gardening, really enjoy gardening, spend all your time potting around in the back garden, but there's still an aspect of you've got the best garden and you want to enter into competition. You still want to be validated for your love of the garden. So there's still an element of the ego. And then 7, you do something for the sake of doing it. You love it. The ego's gone now. You're just totally absorbed in it. There's very little external regulation. And what's interesting when you get to stage 8 is that you totally absorb everything. So you no longer believe in the cause. You no longer believe in looking after your gardening or whatever your the aspect might be. Is that you just know from the stomach and upwards in your whole being, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. And this is where we obviously want to get our volunteers, our audiences up to these higher stages. So what's interesting is when I mapped our communications, and these were just on client messages, they all sat on the left-hand side, pretty much. And the few outliers that sat on the right-hand side of the threshold, they were more accidental rather than intentional. If you looked at the broader communication strategy, they went back to extrinsic motivation. This is very strange. And this is, I think, one of the most telling charts I've worked with, is that this is what's going wrong with our engagement strategies. Is because we're trying to, and this is where we get into values, we're trying to extrinsically motivate intrinsic values. Extrinsic values are around power, wealth, security, all about me. So think about flow, that helps. It's all about looking after myself. It's outside moving in. So that's extrinsic, external. Intrinsic values are around caring for the environment. It's social justice, peace. They come from the self and they move out. There's an outward flow. These are intrinsic values. Our work is pretty much trying to get people to live out of their intrinsic values. I think that's pretty much a baseline for our work. So why is it that we're all sitting on the left-hand side of the motivational continuum in our work? What is driving this trend to the left and not to the right? This is a worrying trend that's been happening over a number of years. And what's happening also in our storytelling, because the organizations I work with, they say, oh, we already do storytelling. We don't need your services. And I kind of roll my eyes a little bit as well. If we don't need my services, then why are all your storytelling sitting on the left-hand side of that motivational continuum? Why do we appeal to the information deficit model? Even to our work around values. Values are very important. But we need to be on this side of the motivation continuum, working with the motivational triggers that drive the stages 5 to 8 on the motivational continuum. So why are we over here is the big question. And it seems that we are experts. If you know this meme, might be quite familiar with it. We are experts at extrinsic motivation. When it comes to intrinsic motivation, when we try to do it, it's embarrassingly bad, I think. Because when we think about how do we intrinsically motivate people, we start talking about love or the heart. And it's all very childish and very soft and cuddly, and it's all embracing. But that's not what intrinsic motivation is. So even when we try to do intrinsic motivation, we tend to make it look childish and not meaningful in terms of meaningful change. In other words, we try to apply the logic of the left-hand side and put it into the right-hand side, thinking that will work, and it doesn't. So this doesn't make sense so far. Hopefully, these will try to tie up how this all comes together. So the problem comes down to a paradigm trap. So first of all, what is a paradigm and what is a paradigm trap? And how do you get out of a paradigm trap? So a paradigm is often spoken about as like a lens we look out into the world, like a pair of glasses we look out into the world, but that's not right. A paradigm is how we think. So it comes from our primary thinking and how we think and relate to the world around us. And when we look at paradigms, what's interesting is that it's the foundation of the paradigm we might totally disagree with. So I'll give a simple example. Many years ago, we used to believe that the Earth was at the center of the universe, and all these objects flying around, the sun and the moon, they moved around us and we sat still. So that was a foundational belief. That was Earth is the center of the universe. Out of that belief, so we look up to the skies, we can validate it. So we have the foundational belief, then we move to validation. Look up the sky, you can see these celestial objects moving around. And then once we have that belief, we then express that belief. If we are the center, everything's about us, then humans are at the center of the universe. That this whole universe is about us. We are the center. So therefore our needs overwrite the needs of the environment, the needs of animals, and so and so. And then once that has been expressed, we then totally accept and integrate those beliefs into our system. So when we have Copernicus, who came around and said, actually, the Earth's not at the center, it's the sun, and we go around the sun, we changed the foundational belief. But all the beliefs that came out of that previous belief that we're at the center of the universe don't change overnight. They take centuries to change. So even now, a lot of philosophers would say, at the heart of our thinking, we still think we're at the center of the universe. We still think the universe is about us, and that we're not one, tiny dots in this great story of what the universe is all about. Is that even though the foundation has changed, it's really hard to change all the other aspects of it. So paradigms can take centuries to shift. They're stubborn because they get integrated into our thinking, and they revalidate because they almost seem true. They revalidate the foundational thinking in the first place. In marketing, we have a foundation belief. The foundational belief is the only reason why we'll do anything is it's because we are fundamentally selfish. We will if you're selling goods or services, you play to the lower values. You create fear and anxiety and say how signing up, buying this product will take away your fear and anxiety. So, but all of this is based on a foundational belief that we are selfish and we're fearful individuals. And the only way to motivate people is to play to your lower values and lower fears and anxieties. And it works. So you have a foundational belief. It's validated. That validation leads to expression. We do our communications, marketing around these lower values approach. And then we integrate and accept these values into our societies, into our economics. Like our whole capitalistic culture is based on the idea that you can't run any other type of way of interacting as humans because we're all selfish. Fundamentally, we're all selfish, and therefore we have to have systems that express that selfishness. That's the only way you can run the world. So this becomes the paradigm trap, and it feeds into the foundation, and the foundation repeats itself and again, and it's really hard to escape from these traps. So the marketing paradigm, I liken it to an engine, like a motivational engine. We love this engine because it works. We use marketing methodologies it's because they deliver on what we're trying to do. And marketing paradigm can be summarized as a very simple statement, which is, sorry, I'm struggling with this presentation. There we go. It's step one, create anxiety in your audience. And step two, show how buying the product will release them from their anxiety. That is marketing 101. That's how you create the motivation for people to buy products. So you can create a fear of missing out. You can point to one of the three aspects that drive people to buy their goods and services, which is greed. Make people feel that they're not in possession of the thing that's going to make them happy. Show them how there's a better, smarter, flashier version of the things that they might already have. Fear, play to people's fear. You're not safe. You'll miss out. Fear of missing out is a great way of motivating people to buy your products. It'll be gone before you know it. And ego, you're not attractive enough to be lovable. You'll not be accepted or respected by others unless you're wearing the latest fashion items. And these are highly detrimental to our mental health. And that's why in this this engine, it has a psychological pollutant. And that's expressed by this smoke coming out at the end of this engine, is that it might drive the motivation for people to buy your product, but the long-term effects of that psychological pollutant is devastating because we keep buying more and more things in order to overcome the deep inner fear and anxieties that we have. So the marketing paradigm sits at the heart of the climate crisis. It sits at the heart that drives overconsumption. And if you look at consumerism as a psychological as a psychological perspective, you can see it's not that people are being greedy; they're trying to overcome deeper anxieties of fear and all the things that we see in accuracy marketing technique. So when we use these techniques, they have a great cost to our sense of self, therefore a great cost to our planet, and great cost to the human family, how we treat each other, because we're all in competition, all trying to overcome this deeper fear of greed, fear, and ego. So marketing works. It works really well. It helps you to sell your product, but at a cost. So why is it that when we look at climate communications and many other forms of communications across the sector, we use the same methodology? So if we want people to sign up to our campaign, we tell them a story which starts off quite good. This is X who lives in this country, but due to a recent flood, where we go down to the bottom, they've been affected by X, Y, and Z, and then we say, if you sign up to our campaign or if you give to us, we'll bring about the magical solution. So we have the same U-shaped curve that sits at the heart of marketing to drive our engagement with audiences. Now, there's a theory to say, actually, when marketing does it, uses this technique, it's to purchase goods. So therefore, you can't really compare that to the charity sector because we're using the same technique to bring about positive change. In fact, we're redeeming the marketing technique for positive good. And I would argue that's not the case. Every time we try to extrinsically motivate audiences to positive change, we create short-term engagement, but not long-term behavior change. If you remember at the beginning, I said marketing paradigm is designed for profit, not for behavior change. It's designed to create anxiety and fear and not to awaken the necessary values you need to bring about positive change. So it's very different to where we need to be. So in many ways, it's these techniques that we use across the charity sector, work, but they work in a way, I think, that's ultimately undermining our collective causes. It's also, and if we doubt that for a second, all we have to do is look at all the issues that we keep facing around low motivation of our audiences, so growing polarization. All these are symptoms of this engine that we keep using for our communications and marketing. So at the heart of what we're trying to do, I think where we've fallen down is that we're using the wrong engine. we need to build a new engine. That new engine needs to work with it's the right-hand side of this threshold. We need to be able to take audiences to the higher stages of intrinsic motivation. And the thing about intrinsic motivation, rather than pulling down to fear and anxiety, you need to learn how to pull up, how to connect people to purpose, how to create the powerful intrinsic motivational triggers to drive the energy towards that purpose. And this is where we get into some really deep psychology. If this hasn't been deep psychology so far, this is where it gets even deeper. We then have to work out what is the heart, because our modern interpretations of what the heart is, it thinks of the heart as an emotional center. The things like if we emotively connect with audiences, then we're connected with the heart. That's not quite the story. It's half the story. The heart has emotion, but emotion with purpose. So when we're working with the heart, we need to move away from extrinsic motivation, move away from promoting extrinsic values around anxiety, fear, missing out, and also move away from the third aspect, which is extrinsic purpose. So when we run a campaign, we engage audiences, it's always for a direct outcome. We want the direct outcome, and we point everyone to that direct outcome. If we sign up to this campaign, we will create this policy change. And that sounds very logical, rational. It sounds a sensible thing to do. Why would you do it any other way? But when we work with the heart, it's very different. When we work with intrinsic values, we see these are values that come from the heart and they move out. So we have to work with intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation is very different. You can't really do it through marketing. You have to do it through storytelling. But intrinsic purpose is also very challenging. How do you work with intrinsic purpose? And I'll try to explain this in the next chart. That when we look at marketing, you get your audience to buy your product. So it's a linear it's relationship. Back to that face-to-face encounter I was talking about earlier. So if I want someone to buy my product, I'm going to present a message. I'm going to use skills or techniques in order to create anxiety for you to buy my product. In other words, I need to create a need. If I don't create a need, you won't buy my product and things fall apart. So therefore, it's easier to work with lower values. If you try to work with higher values in this model, this linear model, it doesn't quite work. The motivation kind of dips, it falls apart. And this is where I was really struggling with for years, trying to work out how to positively engage audiences to real change. And the insight, I think, is you can't in the marketing paradigm. You can't bring about positive change using marketing techniques. You can when we move to the storytelling paradigm. And this is very interesting. If you think about your Christmas adverts, great examples of intrinsic motivation, where you have, I think the first one was John Lewis many years ago. I think it's Do With a Penguin, can't quite remember it. Can't remember what the story was, but there was an advert, and they happen each Christmas, that you watch a story, and the story is not about the product, doesn't tell you anything about the organization, whether you're getting value for money. In fact, you can argue it's gone off topic. It's really gone off topic. It's over there somewhere. It's not marketing anymore. It's that they create a story, and at the end of the story, there's resolution, and at the end of the resolution, the brand comes up, and there's no call to action. There's no telling you to do something. Get involved, 2 for the price of 1. You're not going to benefit from it anyway. So there's no extrinsic triggers in these adverts. And yet they are very powerful. They work really well. In other words, they are using a technique, which is storytelling, where instead of pointing to the product, they point the product to a purpose. So when you shop at John Lewis, it's to a higher purpose around it's an opportunity to bring love to your family. So you're connecting consumerism with a higher purpose, and it works really well. But what happens with charities? Because we all have a cause. What happens if you're working for a global injustice or disability rights or working on environmental issues? Surely that is your purpose. And this is what is one of the most challenging things that keeps us trapped on the left-hand side of the motivation continuum, is that we need to differentiate between our cause and our purpose. Our cause, whatever it may be, disability rights, inequality, gender inequality, all of what we do has to be in service of a higher purpose. And that is when you create this storytelling triangle. And then you tell the stories to that higher purpose and how everything we're doing is in service to something which is beyond. When we try to do our messages using the linear model, and it takes quite a while to explain why this is that instead of bringing people up, we accidentally pull people down. Because in order to get people to sign up to our campaigns, we have to lean towards extrinsic motivation. And if you saw in the previous charts, that's what we do. And when we lean towards extrinsic motivation, we lean towards extrinsic values. When we lean towards extrinsic values, we upset the apple cart and everything shifts in favor of that. So even technically, we've ticked all the boxes, we've covered all the topics, we've communicated our message. At the meta-narrative level, if we're still using this old model, this linear model, I don't think we're going to bring about the positive changes that we all want to see when we engage our audiences for long-term change. So, in summary, if that is not enough to be getting on with, I would argue that it's what is broken needs to be fixed, is that we need to move away from the marketing paradigm, where we adopt marketing theory, marketing values, in order to gauge our audiences for positive change. It works, but it works in the short term. It doesn't bring about long-term change. Instead, we need to be moving towards a storytelling paradigm. And that's not just about telling stories. It's back to that triangle. How do we create powerful narratives that connect to a deeper purpose? What is my cause in service to? And how do I tell that story? So it's not about telling emotionally engaging stories. It's about telling stories that are meaningful towards a higher purpose. And when we do that, something magic happens. We move to the right-hand side of the intrinsic motivational scale. We also awaken intrinsic values that come from within, from the heart, and we build long-term behavioral change. So it's essential, I think, that we need to be moving to this new paradigm. But unfortunately, it's not as easy as pressing a button or one simple technique or this or that. It's moving from one ecosystem to a new ecosystem. And that ecosystem takes time to work with, to build up, and also to get your head around, because actually we have to think differently when we try to engage audiences when it's through the storytelling paradigm. We have to think like a storyteller, not like a marketer. We have to think about how do we awaken the necessary values needed to bring about the changes we seek, rather than how do we get people to sign up to my campaign. That's a very different thinking process. And as a result of that, different campaigns will emerge. Different narratives will emerge. And more importantly, a new meta-narrative will emerge, which is one towards a higher purpose. And out of that, I would say that is a story we need to start telling. We're often told that only stories can change the world. That's not actually quite true. That's half the truth. It's meta-narratives that change the world. And if we're using the wrong meta-narrative, no wonder we get stuck with all the perennial problems we see. We need to move to a new meta-narrative, and that's called the storytelling paradigm. There we go. How are we doing for time? I'm a little bit over. I do apologize. There was quite a lot to discuss there. I I've just got 2 questions to break out into the groups with. Is there anything in there that you found useful in this talk, and is there anything you want to know more about? So shall I hand back to you, Julian, and you can do the honours of moving into the next stage of this meeting?
Brilliant. Welcome back, everybody. What sort of conclusions and things have people come up with? They can put your hand up, shout them out, or put them into chat, maybe just to get a sense of how people have found it, what was particularly interesting, and what we might deal with next. Probably not in the next 5 minutes, but maybe we could be looking at doing some more events, and we will be doing more workshops looking at various aspects of communications. Does anybody have... Go on, Steve.
Just our group, we're talking about the John Lewis advertising campaign, and we thought it would be helpful to see some more examples of how that sort of campaign can work positively.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we need more examples of this type of storytelling. Unfortunately, there's not many. That's my point, is that we're not doing storytelling. So there are a few. They're on my training course. I do delve into that, but yeah, we do need best practice out there.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. What other points have people been talking about or making, or anything you'd like to talk about next?
Raising a hand. No raising a
Okay.
Mushimbe.
Yes. Afternoon there. Afternoon, Africa. How are you?
Hello. Good. Thank you.
Yes, I'm from Zambia, Southern Africa.
Hello there. Good to have you in the group. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I'd like, even though I joined in the meeting late, but I've got a concept what you're saying. I would like to find out one thing where you have carried your research on the sample that you're dealing with the story. So I want to find out the story of what you deal with. I heard about politics and education, something like that. On the what can I use? Let me use this word on the line of the diamond express. Have you understood?
Go on, struggling a little bit. Could you repeat that last bit there, please, Mushimbe?
Pardon?
I'm struggling to understand your question. What did you say at the end there? What was your question or your point?
Yes, the question is, I want to find out how you have carried your research on the term of education. What are the organization is going to do with in terms of education issues? The story of it.
What is that? How we do research on communications?
Yes.
Oh, it's a very interesting question, Kieran. I mean, you've done quite a bit of research on this, but also, you know, there is a difference, isn't there, between the kind of, you know, communications that are happening in Northern Europe, communications that are happening in Africa.
All right.
Kieran, what have you been looking at?
So there's quite a few actors who are working on the research aspects. The one I find very useful is the Common Cause Foundation, who do a lot of good work around values, and they give some insights exactly validating the model which kind of propose around how values relates and how, the relationship between values and motivation and behavior. So what they don't talk about is meta-narratives, and there's quite a few what I'm aware of, a lot of storytelling initiatives and projects which look at deep narratives, but deep narratives and meta-narratives are different. Remember, meta-narratives are implicit. We might not articulate them as words. So when we talk about storytelling, we think about words. That's a mistake, because storytelling goes beyond words.
Right.
Which is helpful, because that makes it more murky and confusing. But
okay. Yep. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Do we have any final questions or points? So we are coming up to the end of the scheduled time for this. So if anybody's got any final questions, any final points before we do a poll, and we do a couple of final thoughts, and I encourage you to to join more of these events. If anybody's got anything, then Alan, please. Oh, great, we've got two. Alan, let's go with you first.
Oh, thinking about it, after the question was asked earlier about is there any other examples? I remember the Nike commercials from the 80s and 90s where they were looking at empowerment and rather than selling the Nike shoe and using Michael Jordan to do that. So the whole commercial was about empowerment.
Right. Yep. Okay. No, interesting. Interesting. Again, just other narratives, other ways of talking about things. I hope I have launched a final poll for people to have a look through and answer some questions, so that we can get a little bit of a sense of how things have gone and to evaluate what we're doing. Wonderful. But we've got a final question there from Isra.
Yeah, it's Isra. Thank you so much. Thank you for the fantastic session. Really enjoyed every bit of it. And it was an eye-opening for me, like for talking about the intrinsic and extrinsic meta-narrative and how we can apply it in different contexts, not only for charities and campaigns, but also for maybe wider audience, maybe in the NHS or outside organization. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for organizing this. I mentioned it in the breakout room, but I would like to ask also, like, if there is any possibility of having other sessions on how to practically deliver storytelling, like using the meta-narrative, and if there is any models or any methods that are standardized that we can apply. So yeah, I think, and I have a conference tomorrow, and I'm already thinking about how to start by using the meta-narrative itself. I will see how it goes. So I'm going to apply it tomorrow for a conference and see how it goes. But I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah.
That's a nice segue. If I can answer that with on our website ministory.co.uk. All the resources, models, materials to help you to explore meta narratives, and the approach I call storytelling for a cause. And that is if you're interested in using storytelling to bring about behavioural change and positive change for good in this world. So there's a whole set of resources, how to move people, audiences, and your communications, the engagement, and everything up to the highest stages of intrinsic motivational continuum. And it's not as simple as being positive. It goes much deeper. So you have to understand there's a lot of kind of psychology behind it. But when you understand that, yeah, you get it. It makes a huge change.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kieran. Good plug there.
Julian, I just want to say that I also have learned a lot, and I'm just requesting for the sake of most of our members who did make to the meeting, if we can have the recording of this meeting, because I'm seeing there is so much to learn for them.
Yep. Yes. So I will be sharing some information and some of the links that we've put in the chat. Some more information from Kieran about Ministory, and some information as well. I would again encourage you to look at Cymru Africa's anti-racism charter, to sign up to that, and to look at the toolkit that we've prepared, which does talk about storytelling and talks about communications and the importance of that. We will be doing a variety of workshops on various aspects of communications over the next few months. My colleague Emma will be leading some work looking at communications and doing that with respect and safeguarding. We'll also be looking at how to get into the media, but it's really good to get some feedback from you about the things that you would like to see, the things that you would find most important, so that we can plan these sessions in the future and look at other things to do. So if anybody hasn't participated in the poll, that can see it and is able to answer those questions, that would be fantastic. But I think we are 4 minutes over time, so it will be time to end. But I'd like to thank Kieran, thank Emma for helping out, and thank all of you for coming along. And that will do. Thank you very much.